I appeared on comedian and actor Bryan Callen's podcast, and I think he identifies as sort of right-wingish, center-right, conservative of some sort, and I hadn't kept up with much of his political stuff before then, so I'm just taking his word for that, but I really enjoyed the experience. Really nice guy, and we had a fruitful discussion. Funnily enough, I'll start with, just because I know this is what you guys want, I'll start with the more combative stuff, but stick around because later on, two people who we probably disagree on a whole lot of stuff. And based on what he was asking me, it felt like he was coming from a much more right-wing perspective. But I think a lot of substantive conclusions were drawn. But we will start with where we disagree. It's funny, just a few minutes before I clicked record, he sent me this video that was some edit from our interview. So let's watch this first. Trump did try to stay in power after he lost the 2020 election. He did assemble
that was adjudicated.
Fraudulent electors.
Adjudicated.
No, the cases had to be dropped because he became president again.
Yes,
and they can't prosecute him.
And
so
there's no doubt
he was being prosecuted, and a bunch of his co-conspirators were being prosecuted because they engaged in a fraudulent attempt to stay in power after he lost.
And
so
Biden
I think those are good cases.
A whole bunch of people who like his own son. I don't know what
that is.
Because I'm saying presidents, if you're going to call him, if you're going to criticize Trump, criticize Biden for the same thing.
Wait, what is the same thing? Biden tried to overthrow an election?
Well, I don't think.
That's something y'all have heard me argue a lot of times. We'll start with the stuff that you've heard me go over and over again, and then to the topics I don't often get a chance, which is why I really appreciated a lot of our conversation, because sometimes covering stories day to day doesn't give you the opportunity to lay out more foundationally why you identify politically a certain way, what your political framework is, and he asked a lot of questions that led to that exact dialogue. So I found it really interesting. But again, Bryan Callen and his podcast is Off Limits. And so if you want to watch the full thing, you can search it there. This was on the subject of Trump's attacks, and this is very relevant with what's in the news right now against the First Amendment. Specifically, I'm citing, as I often do, y'all have heard it many times, the lawsuit against CBS that they settled.
Though, isn't it basically
what is the First Amendment?
The bottom line is he won. Now I know.
No, he got a settlement. They paid him to approve that merger, is what happened.
Happens all the time.
It does not happen all the time.
Of course it does.
Settlements happen all the time. You have to judge. All of the right wing says we're all pro free speech. Take that up with his lawyers and their lawyers. I think that, right, I understand every legal expert ever said this case is going to be really easy to win. But if CBS had fought it, then Trump was going to use his presidential power to punish them, which is an overt attack on the First Amendment.
Maybe.
Trying to force them.
Maybe. That was the threat.
And he was doing it.
That would have been adjudicated too.
And Sherry Redstone at Paramount
encouraged with the fact that
was saying,
yes, but aren't you encouraged?
That's exactly what she saw is happening. So then she said, we need to tone down the anti-Trump rhetoric so we can get this merger to go through. That's not how we want media outlets to operate. If that was Biden,
that's how so there's Biden no doubt from the founding, I bet you in the past 67 years, every corporation will say, hey, we need some friends in government to get this merger going. Don't be criticizing certain people. Could be Trump, could be something like that.
That's way different than media outlets feeling like they will be punished by the government if they say things or edit things the way the president doesn't like.
In the courts, it was. And all I'm saying is that...
It doesn't make any sense. There were plenty of laws that did the Holocaust. Like, there's things can happen legally with legal mechanisms.
At least it's happening in the courts. It's not...
What does that even mean? How else do you think the government punishes people? Through legal mechanisms.
But if Trump says something and threatens something, it doesn't mean... Presidents are going to president, and authoritarians are going to authoritarian, and Trump is going to...
No, we should oppose the authoritarianism.
But you are. The courts did.
They didn't.
Trump has been stopped.
Okay, so we didn't make a bunch of progress on that one, but leveraging the point I'm trying to make is, well, I guess he's saying if Trump's acting unconstitutionally, it'll be litigated in the courts, so it's not as scary as I'm articulating it to be. The problem is, number one, I wasn't really talking about that so much here Because in this case, you're talking about him saying, you have to pay me a bunch of money in this settlement over a bogus lawsuit. Otherwise, I'm going to hurt you with my government power here. How that would be litigated in the courts is a little bit murky. And in the meantime, you suppress free speech a lot and cause people to be afraid of what Trump's going to do to you if you speak out against him. But then even on the court point, there is still hundreds of examples, or at least dozens of examples of the Trump administration just totally ignoring what the courts are saying. I'm curious what his comments are saying about this. Great convo. Okay. There's some people. Somebody said Luke likes to play like he's center, but all his stances are hard left. I think I said in this interview that I don't identify as right in the center. I identify as the center of the country, but not the center of the two parties. I am left of the center into the Democratic Party. If we're using that simple framework. Someone said, I've seen Luke before. Excellent. Okay, look at this. Wow, a gay liberal. Who would have thought, right? Okay, well, not everyone's positive. And Luke is lost. Poor guy. I hope the best for him. How? Explain it. Give me more specifics. Again, I just want to say, these are the more hostile parts. Most of the interview was just totally wonderful. And even those parts I loved, and I do appreciate Bryan Callen having me on. Then on Ukraine, Callen was more sympathetic to the idea that Trump was acting in a thoughtful way, saying that he could end it in 24 hours and he really wants peace. And my argument was, I don't really care what he says if the outcomes of his actions prove something different.
You're talking about this Ukraine thing. He said, I'm going to try to solve this problem. I think he's done it in earnest. He realizes that Putin's no joke. And I think he's realizing that the only way to get the Russians or Putin to come to the table is with kinetic force. They just gave Ukraine these Patriot anti-ballistic missile defense and all that stuff. And so, I think that this was a learning curve for him. And he realized, I can't talk.
You don't think that's
Putin
absolutely... This is a rhetorical question. You can answer it in a second if you want, but let me just fill in some context. I find that humiliating, and it bothers me that people give him credit for things he says for the sake of branding and then completely ignore the actual outcomes of his actions. So you can repeat over and over, and maybe Democrats should do this more. I don't want anyone to die. Too many people are dying. Too many people are dying. I want it to end. I want it to end. I want peace. Peace, 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 peace. But if you don't do anything to actually facilitate peace and you're just going, please, Putin, then that doesn't mean much.
I don't think he's just saying that.
But really,
he's going, please,
it's
a bad Trump impersonation.
He paused Ukraine. Vladimir, you gotta stop. He paused defensive weapons, which is bad, to Ukraine. And then he pulled back on economic sanctions, and he facilitated an environment where Putin was getting so much of what he wanted, which is just the pressure to be off for however long it can. Because Trump was saying,
he tried that, it didn't work, and now he shifted
gears. But
gears.
maybe if you had a thoughtful, not you, him, if he had a thoughtful analysis over the last few years of this conflict, he wouldn't be so moronic on thinking that Putin was serious about peace when Putin breaks ceasefires every 2 seconds.
I think that might be where his ego comes in. I think it might be that Trump said, I'm the only guy that can get to him.
But why does nobody credit, for example, if we're going to do that, why does nobody credit the correct strategy to ending the war in Ukraine is as much pressure as possible, which we're not doing. But right now, still, Russia's making tons of money from Europe buying Russian gas, which is insane. They're trying to pull back, but it's economically difficult. And we're not putting the full extent of sanctions that we could. We're only going to see peace if Putin utterly fails. And there's just too much. All right, so those are the topics you've heard and the more combative parts. But then we get something I don't get to normally explain, which is Bryan asking, you identify as liberal, left of center. Why? What makes you, if you're picking between the two parties, say, I'm going to find myself voting for Democrats as opposed to Republicans? What makes so much of your content criticizing the MAGA movement, aside from Trump right now being the one in power? Even before, I was heavy on that. And it was a good chance to explain, let's whittle it down to this first, because there's a bazillion reasons, right? I mean, this is what's tough about our political dialogue. We put it on this really simple spectrum of political ideologies, and it's much more complicated than that because you have hundreds of political issues, and how that all splotches is more complicated than the story that we usually tell. But to simplify it, I said, well, number one, the economy. And number two, we could say, so you have sort of the main policy impacting stuff around the economy and then social stuff. And how does that cause me to identify the way that I do? As we continue through this, please do click the subscribe button for this channel if you appreciate it. And then if you want to get extra content where we go off the rails and I become a lunatic, then the join button is next to the subscribe button.
Way they do in Spain, and maybe we're missing out. But sometimes I think that, it's hard. Everything is hard. Mm-hmm. Life's a war. And I always get nervous when the left seems to think that they can mitigate that with rules.
Oh, wait. Let me hold up for a second. Let's see if that I set up the wrong clip. We'll get back to that clip. That's an interesting one too, which is if his question is, if you enhance the social safety net too much, then do you suppress innovation? Instead of going to the general political ideology right now, since you already saw some of it, let me continue on that clip and then we'll get back to the one that I earlier set up.
With laws and with more authoritarian oversight. Do you think that's a fair critique?
Some of the left, maybe. Let me push back on a little bit of that premise, because I agree that there's something uniquely American, or we like to believe, that inspires innovation, and there's that go-getter mentality.
It's the idea of potential. It's the idea that I may be poor today, but I can be rich tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's a huge part of the American
for sure,
spirit.
And the dream and all of that. And a huge amount of that is great. Mm-hmm. Allowing, when we do have as a country the type of wealth that we do, for just huge amounts of needless suffering, because we think that's what incentivizes the economic growth or whatever else it is, I don't see as the variable that lends itself to that. Like, as an example, we've become more economically dominant and more innovative, even as we've implemented like New Deal era and on policies that have really successfully addressed poverty. Social Security has been incredible at lifting seniors out of poverty. Medicare has been a really good thing for seniors as well. Medicaid, making sure that low-income folks aren't dying because they can't get health care or going bankrupt because they can't get health care. And so we've still, as we've been implementing those programs and reducing poverty, we've still been going up and up and up in our success as an economy. So we don't have to leave that.
You're saying there's room for both.
There's room for both.
You're saying two things can be true at the same time, and I totally agree.
Yeah.
I mean, you sound eminently reasonable, young man.
Thank you. Where do I come off not reasonable?
So that came up a lot, where he was kind of shocked because he had invited me on and kind of knew my political commentator, liberal political commentator kind of label. And I think was expecting a little bit more hostility than ended up happening. And that does happen, not to like pat myself on the back, but that happens a lot in private conversations and in interviews, where people go, wait, you're not, you can't be liberal. You're reasonable, And it's, oh, well, maybe that's a part of the ground that we can make. Maybe that's part of the confusion here, is that maybe a lot of the people we disagree with, upon further reflection, this is hard for me to say. Let me just say it differently. Maybe a lot of the people that you would assume are insane might have tidbits of reason. Yes. If they're anywhere in what I would call the reasonable part of the spectrum, a lot now of I'm trying to delineate with my hands. Really bad over here, and you got some over here too. But some of the loudest voices are just kind of insane. But that has led us to assume that any conversation with someone who identifies differently politically, it must be a screaming match. But often those dialogues lead to people that I'm talking to going, oh, okay, well, all right, if this is what you call being left of center, then that's not so crazy, which is good. I think it's good. All right, so here's me explaining why I identify the way I do.
You are somebody who believes in, and without getting into why you don't like Trump.
Mm-hmm. Dang it.
What is it about the left's political platform and philosophy that seems to speak to you versus the other.
Yeah. It's interesting you brought up labels because I make an effort to just simplify conversations by quickly throwing out a label. Like, whatever criticisms I have of Biden, if someone's wanting to hear from me as to why I think that he had, numerous achievements, it got really tarnished with the ending and how he had to drop off because his mental acuity became a huge question and ended up that chaos leading to Trump's loss. But if someone wants to say, are you Democrat? Sure.
Meant to say Biden's loss or Kamala's loss.
Yes. Let's skip past some of those weird definitional things that slow down conversations, and I'll be happy to assume someone's label. So liberal, I call myself liberal, but it is tough because a lot of times, to your point, we engage in a lot of those surface level debates and conflicts without diving any deeper into the issue. So the reason I'd identify myself as on the left, liberal, but not socialist. So sort of like I'm definitely left of center, but not all the way to the far left, if you want to continue using those descriptors, is because the number one issue I think most people are concerned with, I think all of us would agree, so it's kind of a dumb answer to give, that, we want as many people in our country's lives to be improved as much as possible. And that's what public policy should be aimed at doing. And the economy is the heart of that. And very simply over the last century, Democrats, because they lean more, if I have to give a really simple answer, into demand side economics, they're more willing to invest in communities that need it. And that filters through all of the economy. But the people who are most likely to spend the support or to use the support that you're funding the most quickly is the best economic stimulator, as opposed to sort of like what Trump was doing in his bill. I won't get too much into it right now, but in that trickle-down economics thinking, that no, if we just again try to cut taxes for the wealthiest, and that will revitalize the economy, the exact opposite thinking is the best approach. And while Democrats get it wrong a lot, I much more align with the approach that they've been more likely to demonstrate over the last really century, as I said, which has led to, across every metric, unemployment, GDP growth, wage increases. The economy fares way better under Democrats than Republican administrations. And I think that's not by accident. Some are big. The reason that happens sometimes, like Trump's economic metrics got destroyed because of COVID, and that wasn't, I think he mishandled it, but that wasn't his doing. But the underlying philosophical difference of being willing to invest extensively in social programs that stimulate local communities and benefit people who need it right then, right now, that ends up actually, funnily enough, trickling up. So I would say the economy is the number one issue, and then on social subjects, being more compassionate and open to lifestyles, even if you don't necessarily understand or agree with them, tends to be a more liberal approach.
Well, the way I look at it is this. You sound very...
So, what was you about to say there?
Very much in the middle when you speak this way, because so I pay probably...
Okay, so it goes on to... Yeah, that's the other thing people say a lot. Well, no, you must be this, you must be that. It's like, well, I mean, one of the things we talked about was I want universal health insurance. So that's pretty... Most people call that left wing. But, and on, like as I said, social issues, I'm really open to even things that I don't fully understand. Speaking of, the next thing that we get into, and I was happy that he brought these up because it really shapes a lot of people's political worldview, is the culture wars. And a lot of voters are voting way less than you would think, way less than I think they should, on what people call kitchen table issues, right? They're right here, economic well-being, the well-being of their children, their standing economically, and get really motivated and radicalized by culture war subject. That doesn't mean that those things in the lives of people who they affect don't matter. They do. And I always believe that we should engage in them proportional to how consequential they are. But what I said in this interview was what's difficult when some of them get brought up now, like some of the trans debates, like the drag queen, whatever, and bathrooms and others, is I think the pendulum swung way too much to where we're doing that moral panic 24/7 and missing things that are just in the numbers affecting so many more people. So we have to do both. We have to stand up for people when it's needed, but we also can't lose sight of the most relevant, consequential policy subjects, and we definitely have done that socially as a country. And I really appreciate too about this conversation. There were points where he was willing to just say, I think actually you might have changed my mind on that. And a lot of people aren't willing to say that. And this was one of them where I was going, some of what you're bringing up is a little bit of a product, at least in how pressing you feel like it is, of your social media algorithm.
Well, it's a disaster. So damage done. So I think it's more than just youthful energy and extremism.
Yeah, you'd reference college. I was just trying to speak to the college point. A lot of that. So first, and I'm going to get to it, don't worry, but my whole, I guess, profession or my area of expertise, what I put my sights on is how do I advocate for changes in public policy. The only way I do that is through candidates that would be in positions of power. And where do I see those relevant issues coming up, and how can I speak to them? And so that's what I'm analyzing on a day-to-day basis.
Because I'm hitting you with all these extreme examples, right?
Well, and I'm just less engaged in things outside of like federal, legislative, electoral policy.
Right.
But I see those things, of course, because that's merged. I mean, that's one big political debate that we're having. But when I bring things back, it's to say this is where I think we should put most of our focus, and then the cultural debates and everything else have a place as well. But I think the pendulum has swung too much, which has breeded more extremism, where we spend 99% of our time debating these. You said it's a big issue. Individual cases would be big in their significance to those folks, and I would, if something was done wrong, would be opposed to it. But the consequential nature of it compared to other public policy issues is tiny. Like there's these cases that will come up.
I stand corrected, and I think I agree with you, Luke. I think,
but I do want to get to that though.
Yeah, I think I got gamed.
I
did. I'm an old guy, so I got excited. I got scared. Right? I'm like, the fuck is this? Chaos.
But I mean, culture does shape politics, so it is important to talk about things, before they're too late. But as an example, there was all of this made. Like as Trump is crafting this bill, just as an example, not to punching back Trump too much, but that's kind of my job. As he's crafting a bill that is going to remove like 15 million people from Medicaid, is going to reduce
many of them young men playing video games and watching porn.
I mean, statistically, no.
No,
because you can find how many is the estimate for how many people are on Medicaid who are able-bodied people, and it's like
and not working, I meant to say,
in the small single digits.
They might be, but isn't that because they're, you can say you have certain disabilities,
but even so, how would someone even fund their life? Medicaid doesn't just give you money. They would still have to. That doesn't make any sense. I don't even know how you would just sit at home. You would need, just because you have healthcare doesn't mean you have money to spend on everything else. And I also think that even if you're sitting on your ass, you should have a basic level of healthcare. And food if you can afford it. But everyone, the vast majority of people on Medicaid who will be impacted by these changes are people who are working and who need it. Every single independent estimate, other than the White House, is obviously not independent, proves that. But as he's crafting that bill that's going to just tens of millions of people, we're over here arguing about Maine trans sports and how the Trump administration is trying to get the Maine governor or something else. And my stance on trans sports, by the way, is especially as you get up into high stakes professional leagues, they should absolutely make whatever rules they need to keep it fair. And they've had different approaches to that. Either way, I don't really care. But then you look into it, and the people at issue were two people in Maine. Two high school trans athletes that this even would impact. So we're talking about two people as...
We had Leah Thomas. You
had a lot
of...
I'm saying in this issue, I'm saying as this is being covered in national politics, we're
looking over here and they're trying to...
16 million or whatever it might be, and just a fundamental redistribution of wealth from the bottom top. But...
So you're talking...
Well, so I keep pausing right before he says a response. Let's see.
You're talking when you really want to make the world a better place and you want to see the policies that actually affect the most people.
Yeah.
It ain't sexy. It's not the giant guy in the, who's crushing people in swimming or in field hockey.
Those things too weren't even.
Yeah. So that's something I've explained to you before. It's not that they don't matter, especially to the people that they involve, and we should have those dialogues. And I think that we could in a more rational environment, but we now live in this world where so much of our discourse is driven by our social media feed. And so even when you think about like him being surprised that a lot of what I was saying he resonated with more than he expected, comes from the fact that if you're in a more right wing, and this applies to left wing too, but if you're in a more right wing algorithm, because that's what you've sort of, clicked on a couple times, then of course what's going to keep you more engaged and thus on the platform longer, which is just how every single algorithm is going to be structured, understandably, that they want people to stay on their platform. It's going to direct you towards the most infuriating and, to you, insane versions of what you're up against. And so that's always why I bring things back to, it's not that we don't have some real extremism. It's just make sure you're checking in on how much is this making it into centers of power. And irrational leftism, right? You have in any ideology or in any movement, you have the people as a part of the sort of left of center movement coalition that I find utterly reasonable. I think that I'm a part of that. And then you have some people who are going to be more fringe voices. And some institutions have been really impacted by that, and that should be called out. Those extremist voices should be called out. But they've been getting called out a lot. And some of the woke panic, while it feels like the effects of the underlying truth, however much you define it as truthful, have subsided, but the rhetoric about that purported crisis has remained. I know that's kind of a pie in the sky way to word it. And so I'm just trying to make sure we calibrate ourselves to, can we not lose sight of the things that impact every single person's life as we're constantly screaming about a few Fox News pet issues? And then what's this last topic on? And then we'll wrap this sucker up. I know it's going on. Oh, he asked again another totally reasonable question. Hey, if you think that essentially your Democratic choice, even if the person in the primary I wanted, who I thought was really good, lost to someone who's a Democrat who I don't really think is as good, why is it generally a rule that the Democrat's going to be better than the Republican? If, and this is his question, I feel like I see all this stuff about how bad things are going in blue cities. So this is what we talked about.
And to what degree is this sort of these Democrat-heavy, left-leaning, big government ideologues? Why does it seem like those cities are doing well? Maybe they're pretty chaotic. Mm-hmm. Is that because of my algorithm? Am I watching the wrong news here? What do you think of that?
Well, first, just let me say, in case any viewers that are more aligned with my ideology are listening, there are a lot of things, as you're like bringing up a question, that just for the sake of a good conversation, there'll just be too many things to address that I'm not going to address. So if you're listening, like, oh, wait, address that part.
So I said that in because this won't be relevant to y'all, because I already kind of grabbed the clips without a lot of the stuff I'm referencing. But understandably in the conversation, so that it was a good conversation, if he would list off 10 thoughts, but then ask me a question about one of them, I would just try to engage with that one or a couple of them and not go through a list off why every single thing I heard I had a take on. And sometimes listeners will take this, why didn't you push back on this thing or that thing? It's, well, there's no way we can have a fruitful discussion if I'm jotting down the 10 things I take issue with his premise.
Would love to if we had
my questions
infinite time.
Are a little too broad.
But all good. Just because to even build a question, there's so many assumptions that each individually would take
Here's
lot
a better, simple
unraveling.
question.
But I have the question about blue cities.
Yeah.
And so what's so fascinating is I don't think that's not purely, that's less like the cultural stuff, just a product of an algorithm. But it is fascinating how it misses a really important part of the picture. There are a lot of blue leaders or Democratic leaders in local areas that are terrible, obviously, as there are Republicans. But if we're trying to get a sense of, okay, each individual leader is going to be different, but if we go back to what's the breakdown of which, if I'm trying to pick like, okay, I need to either focus more on getting the best Democrats I can get elected or Republicans I can get elected, and I'm trying to figure out which primary I should involve myself in these different elections. Generally, is the Democratic going to provide a better one or the Republican? And we're doing that comparison. First off, on the state level, you have a lot of more of those fundamental laws that I think more systemically have an impact on the overall well-being of the state. And that comparison shows that your worst performing states are red states primarily. Your highest poverty is in red states. Your highest gun violence is in red states. Some of the highest crime states are
more than
red
Chicago?
states. Well, that's comparing state to a municipality. Obviously, when you have the dense
I think you have to talk
areas,
about municipalities. I think you have to talk about those because Philadelphia,
Baltimore, I'll get to those.
Yeah.
But my point is, those factor into state by state breakdowns. And so, if you're looking at big cities and the surrounding areas in red states or blue states, which states fare better? And it's just a fascinating phenomenon. The reason why that comparison is what I go back to, like homicide rates being 50% higher in states that voted for Trump than Biden in the 2020 election, is because you don't really have a similar comparative metric, because most big cities, like almost all big cities, are just democratically run. So we have red states and blue states that we can compare. We don't really have red cities to the same degree and blue cities because high population areas.
So it's a hard comparison.
So you can't
Part
exactly
of it might just be
know.
that it's a big city with a lot of people living close to each other.
Right. And like homelessness, where are you going to go if you are homeless? Obviously, the city center with all of the social services. Yeah. If you're a lot of times, So
I think my point has been made there, but there are red cities and blue cities, but there's not really the big cities they reference, like these huge urban centers, huge population dense cities. They're all Democratic. So it's kind of difficult to do an apples to apples comparison because you only have a really small number of huge cities that are red. I can't even think off the top of my head. But you do have a lot of red states and a lot of blue states that have big cities in them and smaller towns. And so you can get a better sense of, all right, on a bigger picture, how are these policies leading to certain outcomes? And that comparison is just brutal for Republican politics, which I think there's tons of reasons that we could spend 10 hours as to why that's the case. The systemic problems in different places aren't just because of their leadership, obviously, but you have to notice that trend. And then some problems that are unique to democratically led areas. Some are worsened by bad Democratic politicians. Yes, absolutely. And if you're pointing to like homelessness in Los Angeles and acting like because in some small town in some red state they don't have the same homeless problem, that's comparable, it misses what is a systemic set of factors about being a really population dense, massive city where all the social services are and also happens to be good weather. So we have to add all of that. And then as I assess all of that, it's why I've become where I am on the political spectrum that I believe that I am, is because I go, okay, so Republicans clearly aren't the solution. That means I need to figure out what are some Democrats doing wrong and what are some doing better. Maybe some Republicans done something good somewhere too. I'll keep looking, but mostly that's so then my advocacy has become, all right, I'm trying to find the best Democrat based on a lot of these little ideological metrics, and that has led to what you see on this very show. So there we go. But again, thanks to Bryan Callen, and thank you all for watching that breakdown. Share your thoughts about it in the comments. Maybe you'll say, another gay liberal. Ick.